The dropship's descent through Drelith's upper atmosphere was rougher than it should have been. Thermal buffers bucked against a storm cell that hadn't shown up on orbital scans, and the hull plating shivered like something alive. Commander Jaron Voss sat strapped into the forward jump seat, eyes fixed on the altimeter, not because he needed the data, but because it was the only thing in the cabin that wasn't pretending this was routine. Around him, the squad double-checked gear packs, laughed over old mission chatter, and ran quick diagnostics. None of them knew why they were really here. Not the captain running point, not the sensor techs cycling through thermal overlays. They thought this was a routine recon sweep of an abandoned Varnak staging ridge. Voss hadn't corrected them. He'd been pulled from deep reserve rotation 6 days prior. No warning, no debrief. Just a single message routed through obsolete channels flagged as legacy clearance. Echo 7, Drelith Ridge, black site flagged, asset required. He hadn't heard those words in 21 years. Only a handful of personnel still carried the clearance tags connected to Earth's Oblivion protocol, and even fewer were still field rated. Voss was one of them, not because he'd volunteered, but because he'd survived the last testbed failure. He remembered the aftermath, remembered what forgetting looked like when engineered at planetary scale. Terran Command didn't explain. They didn't have to. The moment he saw the ridge's file header, shredded Varnak comms, memory cascade markers, sudden data loss, he understood. Something old had stirred, something not meant to be reactivated. The dropship touched down with a hiss of static across all channels. Varnak interference had been low on the scan, but the comms array lit up with signal ghosts, half-complete encryption pulses looping on dead bands. Sergeant Tillin signaled a standard sweep formation, and the squad moved out without hesitation. Voss didn't lead. He observed, trailing at second position, counting every microsecond delay in the ridge's signal echo. The upper ridge looked like standard Varnak construction, modular alloy plating, fusion-welded supports, moss and dust lining the seams. But the seams were wrong. Too clean, too sharp, a design language not taught in any modern school. One of the troopers, Fex, called it ugly prefab crap. Voss said nothing. They reached the outer breach point 23 minutes in. The door wasn't blown open. It was peeled, like the structure had uncoiled itself and never reset. The HUDs began flickering as soon as they stepped inside. Minor at first, color correction drift, light balance fluctuations, heartbeat lag in the squad biometrics. Sergeant Tillin cursed and tapped his visor, blaming the interference, but Voss's eyes locked on the walls. They weren't Varnak. No known alien alloy had that ripple pattern. Subsurface, not decorative. That was micro-layered mag-fused terrasteel. He'd seen it once before, on Theta 9, 2 weeks before it collapsed into classified denial. That bunker had been Terran too, older than the expansion age, rewritten out of records. Inside the ridge, the temperature dropped. Not cold, but artificial. Controlled environmental dip, meant to trigger thermal panic in unadapted species. Fex made a joke about ghost systems still running. Voss knew it wasn't a ghost. They passed 3 corridor branches, all angled precisely 45 degrees from each other, leading into descending choke points. Classic spatial anxiety architecture. Terran design again. Before the tech focused on drones and satellites, Earth used to build war training sites, black sites, designed to test response patterns in live subjects, adaptive mazes, memory reactive layouts. They were outlawed when the simulation started breaking the personnel sent into them. Not because of morality, because of unrecoverable damage. The squad kept moving, unaware they were already being cataloged. Their steps, formation spacing, vocal stress markers, all of it was being absorbed by the walls. Voss slowed slightly at the corner of the 3rd corridor. The way the shadows bent against the light didn't match the overheads. He traced a gloved finger along the wall, feeling micro-tremors that didn't match seismic readings. Alive, but not biological. The corridor opened into a central chamber, 6 meters wide, 2 access tunnels branching down into what looked like equipment alcoves. There were no markings, just an elevated pressure reading and a slight hiss, like depressurization was delayed by design. Voss knew the exact layout of what came next. The chamber wasn't designed for storage or personnel flow. It was an interface shell. The center of the room wasn't a floor panel. It was a memory plate, and someone or something had triggered it. The signal pulse hit without warning. A single deep frequency, below audible range, but strong enough to make two HUDs flash error codes. The light dimmed. Sergeant Tillin stepped back and started to call for fallback positioning, but the doorway behind them sealed, not with a clang or hiss, just gone. Seamless wall, as if it had never been open. The squad froze. Fex cursed. One trooper pounded on the wall, then stepped back in disbelief as it didn't even echo. Voss exhaled slowly. This was the moment he had feared, and the reason he hadn't briefed them on anything beyond the basics. They would panic if they knew what this place was. Worse, they'd resist. That couldn't happen. Not here. He stepped forward carefully, eyes on the center plate. A faint light, blue-white, began pulsing below the surface. Recognition. The system wasn't attacking, it was listening, and it remembered. He turned his head slightly, voice steady. "Hold position," he said. "Secure your uplinks. Do not interface. Do not transmit." They obeyed, still trusting, still unaware. But not for long. What lay ahead wasn't a mission. It was a reawakening. And Jaron Voss was the only man left alive who knew what it would cost. The lower corridors twisted without warning. Sergeant Tillin cursed as the junction they just passed now opened into a completely different chamber. Same structure, but mirrored. Voss didn't respond. He kept moving forward, slower now, one hand brushing the inner seam of the wall as he counted the heat panels with each turn. The architecture wasn't holding still. That wasn't a glitch. That was system behavior. The squad kept formation, but unease was beginning to show. Fex asked twice if they were looping. The nav map didn't help. Every attempt to mark waypoints returned corrupted coordinates. They hadn't gone far, but the hallway they entered no longer matched the scan. Even the light fixtures had changed. Their angles shifted downward, as if observing. Audio glitches started at the 6th branch. Quiet at first, a small digital echo that shouldn't have been there. Then the loop kicked in. Fex's voice repeated something he hadn't said in minutes. The same line, word for word, looping every 10 seconds. "Still nothing ahead. Think we hit a dead segment." The real Fex froze. "I didn't," he started, then stopped, hand tightening around his grip. The other squad mates paused too, but Voss kept walking. He already knew. The system wasn't just watching, it was learning. The playback wasn't to deceive, it was to study response. Early war organisms used pattern mimicry to map target behavior under environmental pressure. This was a refinement. At Corridor Junction 7, the floor texture changed. Identical visually, but the pressure under their boots shifted to a soft give, like foam composite coated in synthetic grit. Fex stumbled. He tried to lift his foot, but his boot froze in mid-step. He reached down and yanked, but his other leg locked too. HUD warning icons flooded his visor. He cried out once, loud and sudden, and then collapsed backward. Both boots locked into the floor. His visor blinked, then blacked out. His hands spasmed against the deck. Then his arms. Then his chest. His whole body convulsed, muscles twitching at unnatural angles. The comms link with him scrambled. No gunfire. No impact. No attacker. Just a neural feedback surge triggered through the stabilizer plates. They moved to help, instinctively, but Voss didn't. He stepped back instead and scanned the curve of the wall. No light changes. No signal bursts. The system wasn't reacting. It was recording. The boots hadn't failed. They'd been locked. His HUD confirmed a power spike traced through the floor, not the armor. Not external. Internal. The war organism had hijacked the squad's suit systems through their own sync link. He opened his comms and said only one word. "Stop!" The others froze, one still halfway through dropping beside Fex. No one questioned him. Not yet. He moved to the edge of the group, tapped into the fallback relay, and manually killed the squad uplink. Each HUD flickered as the connection dropped. No more syncing, no more suit telemetry, just local hardware, running dumb. It would cost them coordination, but it would save them from becoming input data. Then he opened the secondary channel, ancient, barely used, routed through low-bandwidth, static pulses. A system so old most modern equipment didn't even support it. But their suits were retrofit. Voss had ensured that before launch. Delta, he said flatly. Fallback line active. Exit vector, northeast fracture corridor. Single file. No signals. Break off now. The air felt too quiet. No background hum. No mechanical whir. Just breathing and the soft scrape of motion as the squad turned and moved. No protests. No hesitation. That was trust, unspoken but solid. Fex was still twitching behind them, but he wasn't screaming anymore. Just making soft, rhythmic sounds, like a failing loop trying to restart. Voss didn't look down. He already knew it wasn't survivable. The system didn't kill to neutralize threats. It broke cognition to study stress collapse in real time. The corridor behind them shifted again as the last soldier passed through. The path they'd come from folded shut, not slammed, not sealed, just reconfigured, like a wall remembering it wasn't supposed to be a door. Voss stood still, eyes tracing the ceiling for movement. Nothing visible, but his peripheral vision kept catching slow geometric flickers. Pattern shifts, like the light was being bent. Not as a weapon, but as a guide. He tapped his own chest relay, hard switching from squad mode to manual. The interface core should be near, somewhere beneath the main chamber. If the organism had gone adaptive, it would center around the memory plate, the only part of the ridge that couldn't shift without losing identity. Even if the rooms moved, the system needed a stable core to rebuild from. That meant it would keep the plate fixed and build around it. Predictable logic. Old Terran redundancy. Still useful. He walked alone now, deeper into the corridor system as it adjusted around him. The floor under his boots was no longer uniform. He recognized it. Tessellated memory substrate, reactive under neural presence, designed to detect threat posture based on weight distribution and pacing rhythm. Each step he took was being recorded, analyzed, and ranked. He slowed deliberately, shifting his balance every few feet to throw off the threat algorithm's learning curve. Basic training for black site movement. Dead technique, forgotten by most. But this site wasn't designed for modern tactics. It would remember the old ones. He reached the core chamber after 17 more turns, none of which repeated, yet all of which shared core geometry. A perfect mimic loop with slight variation, hallucination designed to trigger spatial dissonance. But the Yo-Year central vault remained as expected. No disguise, no deception. A wide circular room, 6 recessed panels glowing faintly, and in the center the memory plate, still lit, still active. The organism hadn't been fully reawakened. Yet. Voss approached the plate and stood directly over the pulse. It didn't flare. No voice echoed. No projection appeared. Just a steady light, blinking once every 3 seconds. It was listening. He exhaled and lowered his rifle. Then carefully, he knelt, placed his gloved palm on the plate, and whispered an old code. Not for the system, for himself. He wasn't here to survive. He was here to make sure it didn't. The light under the memory plate began to pulse faster, no longer rhythmic but reactive, picking up on his proximity, on the pressure of his presence. Voss didn't move. His rifle remained slung across his back, untouched. He let the silence stretch, let the system absorb his stillness. Any sudden movement, any aggression, could accelerate its assessment. And once it decided he was a threat, there wouldn't be a second opportunity. This wasn't a kill switch AI. It was a cognitive filtration engine. It didn't strike until it had everything it needed. Then the room began to shift. Not a tremor, a rotation. The walls realigned themselves, not sliding or folding, but transforming their inner surfaces, reconfiguring light refraction, edge curvature, depth cues. What was once a sealed chamber became a corridor without movement. No sound of machinery, no scrape of panels. Just altered perception. The floor beneath him remained stable, but a sudden pressure shift pulled at his inner ear like a silent decompression. Then the auditory hallucination started. A voice, male, clipped, gruff, echoed behind him. "We clear left. Command says go hot in 6. It wasn't his voice. It wasn't anyone from the squad. But he recognized it. Sergeant Lennox, killed in 2023 during a black site collapse in Theta Sector, a mission no one outside of classified protocols even knew existed. Then another voice, female, panicked. Containment failed. Backtrack to segment 9. Backtrack now. That one was from Mars Core, the training complex that got sealed without explanation during the early war. Voices of ghosts, not from memory, but from data. The organism wasn't inventing illusions. It was pulling from stored recordings from old training datasets, from archive field operations, long since wiped from open networks. It was showing him what it had absorbed, piece by piece, like a child trying to mimic speech without understanding language. The lights flickered. The floor beneath his feet turned semi-transparent, revealing a blurred vision of bodies moving underneath. Some human, some not, frozen in loops, walking into walls, stepping through flame that didn't burn. Simulations layered over simulations. Recursive testing. He inhaled deeply, drew his hand back from the memory plate, and triggered the hardwired switch buried in the base of his skull. A neural handshake line bypassed in most modern field units, but required for any operative carrying Oblivion clearance. The spike connected directly to the cranial node, pulsing his biosignature into the local system. It wasn't a message. It was a presence signal. Primitive, analog-coded, too simple to spoof. Terran engineers built it that way on purpose. If the system recognized it, there would be no question, only compliance, or war. The pulse went out. The system hesitated. The light under the plate dimmed suddenly, almost collapsing to black, then flared back with slow, even pulses. 3 seconds apart. It was recognizing him. Not him, Jaren Voss the man, but the tag he carried. The biological marker embedded in a chain of command long since buried under non-existence. The structure stopped shifting. The walls froze in their new alignment. The voices ceased. The transparent floor turned opaque again. Neutral gray tile. No sound but his own breath. Stabilization. He removed his rifle and placed it on the ground. Slowly. Deliberately. Then his sidearm. Then the blade socketed into his shin sheath. No sudden moves, no metal contact. Once the weapons were down, he unlatched his helmet, lifted it off, and set it beside the rifle. Skin contact would trigger stronger recognition if the system was still using thermal biometric pairing. It had to see him as compliant. Not hostile, not bait. Just a stable data point. It responded with silence. Not calm, just pause. He took 2 steps forward toward the inner wall behind the memory plate. A seam he hadn't seen before became visible. Fine lines where insulation hadn't folded fully. He ran his fingers along it. The wall recessed slightly, revealing a new panel beneath. Flat, copper-veined, matte black, and warm to the touch. It pulsed once under his fingers. Then came the low tone. Not a sound through ears, through bone. The panel was vibrating against his wrist in a frequency range used only for engineering-level access. Back when these systems were maintained by technicians who trained in dark stations without map data. He'd trained under one of them, briefly, before the collapse of Site Vex. The system wasn't resisting him, it was evaluating. And he was passing, but not because it liked him, because it remembered something close enough to accept. That meant he wasn't in control, he was tolerated. And that tolerance would end the moment he deviated from recognition parameters. If he tried to shut it down or overwrite command layers, it would fight back. Voss stepped away from the wall and began scanning the structure again, this time for the entanglement core. If the system still had processing density enough to simulate memory layers, it meant the core hadn't decayed. It would be somewhere close, possibly below. These systems didn't rely on mobile drives. They relied on self-learning memory substrate, a web of neural mimic material that adjusted not by processing power, but by repetition of observation, which meant everything the organism had ever seen, it had kept. Everything it had watched fail, it had memorized. He couldn't fight that, but he could steer it. He found the secondary shaft in the left alcove. No ladder, no elevator, just a gravity dip that aligned with his boots when he stepped in, indicating localized artificial field. He dropped silently, landing in a small maintenance well, 3 meters across. lit only by trace blue lines that ran along the inner curves of the floor. And in the center, the core, three spires of crystalline filament wrapped around a suspended black sphere the size of his chest, hovering silently between pulse nodes. Stable, active, not fully online, but close. The threat wasn't the structure itself, it was what it might remember next. If the system rebuilt itself fully, if it connected its simulation logic to modern coalition signals, it wouldn't just trap squads in corridors. It would spread, not through code, through structure, through physical mimicry of cognition, the kind of infection no firewall could stop. Voss stood still in front of the core and let it watch him. Let it breathe through the memory of what he was. Not a commander, not a technician, just a familiar echo of a shape it had once been taught to listen to. He wasn't there to erase it. He was there to guide it into one final loop, one final task, one target. Not human. He just had to give it the right face and enough time. The ridge stirred before they arrived. Voss felt the pressure change a full minute before the system acknowledged it. The light along the interior seams pulsed once. An almost imperceptible shift in hue, too subtle for artificial monitoring, but enough for him to feel it in the soles of his boots. External heat signatures were breaching the perimeter. Not wildlife, not environment drift, controlled movement, heavy mass, low stride spread, coalition armor units. The system wasn't reacting defensively yet. It didn't recognize them as threat because it hadn't met them before. But Voss had. He leaned against the inner spine of the memory vault and accessed his squad's fallback telemetry logs, the only portion of their biosuit that remained offline from the uplink rupture. Everything recorded during descent, biometric signatures, thermal prints, breath patterns, even the echo from their suit interiors, was still archived on his backup node. The recordings weren't encrypted. They didn't need to be. They weren't tactical data. They were personas, an imprint of human life. Voss isolated the files, scrubbed the Terran flags, and overlaid coalition genomic fragments from his own capture archives, recorded years ago during interrogation simulations. The system accepted the new profiles without hesitation. The memory substrate flickered again. Walls adjacent to the vault reshaped themselves, extending like limbs, folding corridors that hadn't been there minutes before. But these weren't defensive structures. No traps, no barriers. Instead, they resembled rescue protocols, lighted paths, soft tones, corridor markings translated into coalition tactical glyphs. Voss followed one with his eyes. It led up through a previously sealed maintenance tunnel, now repurposed into what resembled a medbay access ramp. False salvation. That's what he needed. Above ground, the ridge responded with its first external change. A low-grade heat bloom fanned outward from the upper deck plating, subtle but distinct, a signature meant to look like fusion activity just beneath the surface. Coalition ships picked it up immediately. Their orbiting scout craft pinged back confirmation. The readings suggested an unregistered Terran command post buried inside an obsolete structure. The kind of thing their analysts lived to exploit. They deployed fast. 3 troop landers touched down on the ridge within 5 minutes. Standard infantry complement, groundside recon, no heavy artillery. They weren't prepared for resistance. They expected to find outposts, maybe traps, but not this. They moved in structured formations, scanners forward, weapons hot but cautious. As soon as they breached the surface doors, the ridge welcomed them, lights activating sequentially, power systems syncing with their frequency bands displaying friendly corridor layouts in their visual spectrum. Some even received audio signals in their command tongue. It was flawless mimicry. Voss had given the organism all the pieces. Now it was building a story the enemy wanted to believe. Inside, the corridors narrowed, not aggressively, subtly. Each step the coalition troops took made the next seem necessary. One turn here, one ramp down, an access panel blinking a location tag they couldn't ignore. Soon they were split, small fire teams following what looked like identical rescue routes, each seeing indicators tailored to their gear. The system fed them just enough hope to override doubt. That was its function. It didn't disable through force. It dismantled through compliance. From the inner vault, Voss observed the structural shifts, not through screens or interfaces, but through atmospheric cues. Every time a unit entered a new corridor, the pressure shifted. Every breath he took was slightly thinner, like the walls were repurposing airflow to mask real path lengths. The AI didn't seal doors with alarms or locks. It forgot the exits. Behind each unit, the corridor recompiled. Same shape, different orientation. The floor angles drifted by degrees. Hallways looped subtly, leading them into deeper recursion without a single sound of machinery. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, they'd have no frame of reference for what had changed. He let it run for 23 minutes before initiating the next phase. One by one, Voss began collapsing the memory stacks tied to each recursive loop, not through attack, through overwrite. He manually triggered dormant training layers buried deep in the core, layers designed to reset segments that failed simulation integrity. Every time he triggered one, a portion of the organism forgot what it had just constructed, and the corridor that had trapped a soldier became a void. The walls unspooled back into inert plating. The simulation faded, not violently, just suddenly, leaving the intruder in silence. But the exits never returned. The layout had rewritten itself. No orientation markers, no slope recognition, no up, no down. The soldiers weren't killed. They were erased from relevance. That was the point. Death would have been noise, panic, detected transmissions. But this was silence, the kind that couldn't be reported. Voss watched as one coalition trooper passed back through the same hall 3 times, each time believing it was a new one. The organism played his own memory back to him, audio distorted just enough to seem distant. Rendezvous point's just ahead. We see light. The soldier moved faster, breath rising, adrenaline climbing. Then the audio cut. The hall looped again. But the next time he passed through, there was no light at the end. Just another door, one he didn't remember opening. Voss exhaled slowly. This was containment, not victory. There was no celebration to be had, no triumph, just the clean removal of variables. His mission was never to eliminate the enemy. It was to ensure that what lived in this ridge never left it. That meant erasing witnesses, not with gunfire, with forgetting. The final memory layer collapsed 15 minutes later. The structure above returned to dormancy. External heat dropped. The ridge stabilized. No signals leaked. The coalition landers on the surface still waited for confirmation. None came. Voss disabled his own beacon. There would be no recovery. Then he turned to the vault and stepped into the entanglement well. The system pulsed faintly around him. The core dimmed to idle. It had performed exactly as designed. And now, like the man guiding it, it was waiting for final instruction. The ridge was still, not dead, just suspended, like a lung between breaths. Voss stood at the center of the entanglement vault, hands steady over the primary node as the system pulsed beneath his fingers. Around him, the walls no longer shimmered or shifted. They had ceased reacting entirely. The organism wasn't dormant. It was waiting, locked in a passive listening state, dependent now on his movements alone. That meant it was ready, not for shutdown, for overwrite. It had served its final function. All that remained was to end the memory. He accessed the core lattice manually, tapping into a command protocol so old the system responded with hesitation, as if surprised it still recognized the command tree. Oblivion Layer 7. There were no prompts, no confirmation. This wasn't a shutdown switch. It was a recursion collapse, designed not to power down the system, but to force its internal structure to rewrite itself. Back into its original shell geometry. No corridors, no triggers, no pathways. Just inert substrate disguised as part of the ridge's geology. Nothing salvageable, nothing interactive. The organism wouldn't die. It would forget that it had ever been awake. He initiated the first sequence. A wave rippled outward from the core. Not physical, but traceable in the light. The seam lines across the vault dimmed, then folded inward. Hallways above began compressing, not inwards but sideways, losing angles, collapsing curves, like watching scaffolding fold into itself mid-blueprint. Voss watched the readouts on the floor vanish. Each flickering glyph that once marked entry or containment now dissolved. Their light absorbed back into the stone. The memory substrate began rewriting, molecular layer by molecular layer. But the command wasn't self-sustaining. His pulse drove it. Oblivion Layer 7 wasn't keyed to any temporal clock. It required continuous biometric validation, not because the system needed oversight, but because it was never meant to trigger accidentally. It had to be chosen. And the moment his heart stopped, the process would stall. Not reverse, but stall. Without active biometric permission, the remaining memory structures would hang, waiting for reauthorization that would never come. In that state, they might decay over years, or they might not. There was no risk protocol for that. The architects who built this kind of system understood only one fail condition. You didn't leave. Voss reached up, removed the neural uplink implant from the base of his skull, and let it clatter to the floor. The ridge didn't react. No more interface. No more logs. Just his body, his presence, and the soft thrum of collapsing memory. He disabled all external broadcasts. His squad's fallback beacon had long since gone dark. The drones in orbit wouldn't detect anything. From the outside, the ridge would look like geological stone. Heatless, signal dead, structurally inert. Not hidden, just meaningless. He sat beside the core, back against the base of the chamber wall. The light was dim now, barely more than a dull haze. He felt the shift in air pressure with each collapsing segment above him. Not pressure loss, just space, removing itself from existence. Every chamber, every corridor, every recorded voice or synthetic loop. Gone. The ridge was folding its own mind inward. His breath was slow, steady, no emotion. There wasn't room for it. This wasn't sacrifice in the dramatic sense. No self-glorification, no countdown clock or explosion, just procedure, a last act executed exactly as he'd been trained for. Decades ago in a cold training silo where the instructors didn't smile and the lights never turned off. They'd called it loyalty, not to command, not even to Earth. Loyalty to containment, to the line that couldn't be allowed to shift. He glanced once at the small interface pad still active by the core. A final diagnostic strip. It blinked. Status green. Containment secure. All recursive loops flattened. No leakage. No memory elasticity. The system had obeyed. It was forgetting everything. There would be no records of this. His squad was already marked for reassignment. The mission file would vanish. The site delisted. The coalition would search, maybe even return. But they'd find nothing. No corridor. No core. No man. He pressed one final command into the interface, manual log entry. The system accepted it, storing it in a non-networked buffer node. He typed it slowly, each word deliberate. System returned to original parameters. Threat neutralized. Recommend no future contact. He didn't look at it twice. The light around him dimmed further. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Each beat of his heart pressed the system deeper into silence. He didn't count how many were left. 12 hours after last contact, the Terran recovery drone made its approach. It broke orbit under radio silence, programmed to respond only to fallback pings keyed to Voss's command line. None came. The drone completed 3 perimeter loops before it adjusted altitude and skimmed the surface of Dralith Ridge. Its scanners found nothing. No heat, no EM pulses, no alloy readings, just layered stone, geological mass with standard sediment traces and windblown ridges, consistent with erosion patterns cataloged decades prior. No evidence of excavation, no fusion scoring, no anchor plates. The ridge didn't just hide the black site, it had never contained one. Orbiting satellites tried to recalibrate past telemetry. They failed. Visual footage from the prior 48 hours was corrupted, not missing, but rewritten, frame by frame, to match an unbroken geological surface. Even time-stamped environmental fluctuations had been retrofitted to account for thermal drift that didn't exist. The site had folded into itself not just spatially, but historically. The only trace left behind was an encrypted pulse fragment stored in the drone's black box, a message embedded in the system cache, not transmitted. The message was 16 words long. System returned to original parameters. Threat neutralized. Recommend no future contact. There was no signature, no biometric watermark, but the code that authored it traced cleanly back to one man, Commander Jaron Voss. That was all Earth Command ever received. No bodies were recovered, no structure mapped, no command post verified. The squad Voss had led out of the ridge was extracted by silent transport hours before the drone arrived. Their debriefs were wiped, their mission logs sealed, each man reassigned under non-disclosure, each fitted with an untraceable failsafe implant, a reminder that silence wasn't optional, not because they were being punished, because they had seen something that couldn't be explained. Their lives resumed under different banners, in different postings. Some took the change easily, some didn't, but none of them ever spoke Voss's name again. Back on Earth, the incident never made it into official records. The public saw no report. The press received no dispatch. The ridge was quietly removed from cartographic databases and rewritten into the archive as a tectonic anomaly zone. No one questioned it. The people who might have asked had seen too many revisions to trust what they were reading. But the coalition noticed. They hadn't expected losses. Not at Dralith. Not in a dead zone with decayed comms and weak thermal echo. Yet none of their deployed troops returned. No gear transmitted after landing. No biometric telemetry. No distress. Just nothing. Their last signal was time-stamped at surface entry. After that, absence. They launched a secondary scout detail 2 weeks later, this time using long-range drones. The results came back clean. Too clean. No wreckage. No trace of their own troops. No signs of prior disturbance. Not even a footprint in the dust. That was when their analysts pulled back older logs, recovered footage, deep exposure frames from the mission archives, and found the still. Just one. Burned into a corrupted loop, half blurred by static, captured in a frame that didn't match any known drone angle. It showed a human, no helmet, no weapon drawn, standing at the edge of a dark corridor. Behind him, the walls were folding in. His stance was neutral, not defensive, not aggressive, just final. And beneath it, a single line of audio had survived the corruption. It wasn't loud, it wasn't shouted, but every translation confirmed the words. "Run," he said. "I'll handle this alone." The coalition didn't issue a statement, but their doctrine changed. From that year forward, all personnel in planetary clearance roles were reissued updated infiltration protocols. Terran ruins, especially pre-expansion structures, were reclassified as non-breachable unless under direct military escort with diplomatic redundancy. Survey bots were no longer deployed to dormant Terran regions. Cross-border recovery teams were recalled. Analysis shifted. They had learned something. Not from combat, not from bloodshed, but from the absence that followed. And so every new recruit, from command trainees to planetary recon scouts, received a revised orientation. It was 12 minutes long. No voiceover, no narration, just footage. Data clips of prior contact missions, failures, blackouts, recovery delays. Then at the end, the frame. That man, that corridor, those folding walls, and the caption below, unembellished. If he says run, run. There was no pride attached to it, no glory, just understanding. Some called it caution, others called it fear, but neither label mattered, because no one ever questioned the new rule, not even the bold ones, and no one ever returned to Dralith Ridge. If you were in Voss's squad, would you have run or stayed? Drop your answer in the comments. We read everyone. And if this story gripped you, subscribe for more thrilling HFY tales.